All right, guys, welcome back to another 11 Yanks episode. For this one, I thought I'd do something a little different, actually. Those of you who've been watching the channel for a while have seen the CONCACAF Council. Today is the inaugural meeting of the American Soccer Council, a collection of American YouTubers who cover the American soccer landscape. We have the notorious Derek Rishi from the Straight Red Card. How you doing, Derek?
I'm doing great. And that's Richie, by the way, Pete.
Richie.
Yeah, I wish I were French, but I'm not.
It makes you seem more sophisticated if
It
I say
does.
Rishi, Derek.
Rishi.
We have Sam from Yank Report, still the holder of the best background trophy for
What's
American
going on?
soccer.
I feel like Filippo's catching up to me right now with that scarf.
We're all just trying to beat you,
Austin.
Sam.
I know you like Austin, Sam.
I do. I just got a Atlanta United jacket. So now I got that.
Those are my rivals.
Your rivals?
Or
I have a
rivals.
friend who
It's
used to
always
work
really
there
long.
and they gave it to me. It was a thing. But anyway, it's nice.
And then, guys, we have Filippo Silva from Tactical Manager, who many of you already know. Guys, thank you so much for being here today. For everybody watching, don't forget to smash, the like button if you haven't already. If you're new, subscribe. We cover everything in the American soccer landscape. But today, I think that the point of this council is really to get different perspectives and ideas and opinions from people who I think, bring value to the discussion, in American soccer. We're in a very interesting time. American soccer is growing. We're getting better as a whole, both as a team in our, culture, MLS. And, part of that is more passion, right? And more fans and more discussion and higher expectations. And so I thought I'd get us all together to discuss some pressing, pertinent issues in the American soccer landscape. So thanks for hopping on, guys. I appreciate it. So hopefully we'll try to do this once a month. We might even bring on another guest from time to time, but this should be exciting. So today we have 5 or 6 things that we're going to discuss that are sort of current. The first one I wanted to start with, if that works for all of you guys, is the USSF Presidential elections that are coming up. So U.S. Soccer recently released the list of candidates for the presidential election, and it was a surprising number of 2 candidates. We have Cindy Pardo Cone, the current incumbent president, and we have former president and vice president Carlos Cordeiro, who resigned in disgrace, I think just over a year ago now. Guys,
No, it was during the pandemic, right? 2020.
2020, yeah.
Yeah.
2020.
Yeah, it was 2 years ago.
About a year and a half ago or so. Anyways, the point is he resigned in disgrace. Real quick, the catalyst for his resigning was, I believe, a clause in the negotiations with the women's soccer team about how women were less skilled than men, which is why they deserved less pay. I honestly don't know all the details of that exactly, and I don't even know if he's necessarily responsible for that clause.
I think it was comments. I think it was comments that he made in an interview whenever people asked him if the women were getting paid less for the same job, and his comments were like, it's not the same job, and kind of went into detail about why, and it was fairly disparaging towards females.
Really, because as I understood it, it was actually a document that was submitted to the court, which it's not something he said, but which the lawyers basically said that the reason they were getting paid less was because of this.
I think, and that was certainly part of it. Yeah.
That's what I remember. Correct me
There
if
was
I'm wrong.
probably
I
a
don't
few
know.
reasons why he had to go.
It was,
Right.
yeah, it was a lot in a short period of time.
Right. So he resigned in disgrace, and as we've recently discovered, he's running again against his former VP. Sam, since you seem to have some knowledge about the subject, do you want to just start us off with your thoughts about these 2 candidates?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'll say is that this is happening sort of in the shadows. We know so very little about this process and these people and what they bring to the table. Sports Illustrated just put out a pretty detailed article about it with at least as much details as we can gather, because like I said, so much of this is behind closed doors. And the big things that they point out is that, number one, the things that Carlos Cordeiro is running on, the things that he says he wants to change about U.S. soccer are the exact same things that Cindy Parlow-Cohen is saying that she wants to do. So we're not seeing a lot of differentiation between the two candidates on a platform level. The big differentiator is, of course, that the big thing that we have in U.S. soccer, at least the U.S. Soccer Federation has to deal with coming up, is that CBA agreement with the women's team. And why on earth would you want the man who is responsible for the controversy to jump back in as we get into the CBA negotiations? It seems like a terrible thing to do from a U.S. soccer perspective. So it doesn't make much sense there. At least that's the perspective that I have, and that's perspective of the article. Is just the optics on this are absolutely terrible, and it doesn't make much sense why anybody would even want to put this guy up for nominate him for a potential presidency run.
Apparently, he forgot that he resigned in disgrace. I don't know any other reason why he would put himself through this, because he's got zero chance of winning this at this point. Absolutely zero. When you resign in disgrace and you surrender, that's it. It's done. You're not going to come back from that, especially in the environment we have right now, and all the things that Sam just pointed out. But, there's nothing that would be that different if he would win, and he's not going to. I mean, we're still going to have a fairly unself-reflective, inauthentic organization run in the dark by boards and groups who make votes that, we really don't know much about. I don't think that there's any chance in hell that Carlos wins this.
So, just for starters, it doesn't make any sense that he's even trying to run, right? I wonder who were the three that nominated, because you need three members of the board to nominate him. I wonder who they were. I also wonder maybe. I wonder also how he passed the background checks as well. Even that, I don't know. But anyhow, I think if we're going to look into the bigger picture, what U.S. soccer really needs is neither of the candidates, right? We need something new. There's a lot that has to change. It's a very shady organization in terms of many different things, right? And I believe he was there during the process of hiring of Greg Berhalter as well. He was the one in charge during that time. That's not a reason for him to resign. That's not what I'm saying. But and there was also the scandal or the issues with the U.S. women's national team as well, which he most certainly doesn't know how to properly handle it. It's disappointing, but it's no surprise that this is still going on with U.S. soccer, at least with the federation. It's going to continue to be like this, regardless of who's the candidate. We talked with this with Eric Troinaldo once as well, and he said how the whole process is, he wouldn't say rigged, but how it's just like sketchy and nothing changes. It's the same crap over and over again, regardless of who's in charge there.
It's a total insider job. All these people that are doing the voting and they all know each other. It's a clique, and that's the real problem. But it's been like that since I was 15 years old. I mean, this is nothing new. It's all reflective in how timid the press are and the media are. When you watch the interviews with Greg Berhalter, they're all trembling. They just don't want to say the one wrong thing where they're going to lose access. And as long as that is a reflection of the culture of what is U.S. soccer, and it's been that way forever, then it's broken. It's not in their eyes. They think this is great.
Oh, because they benefit from it.
That's absolutely right. They're in the in crowd.
They don't care really about because there's a difference between MLS and U.S. soccer, right? U.S. Soccer Federation, their goal has to be all focused on U.S. soccer and what's best for soccer. On the other hand, sometimes it seems like they prioritize how MLS can profit a little more, and they also prioritize how they themselves can profit a little more because they are related to MLS. A lot of the guys in the board are somehow in one way, shape, or form connected to MLS with a job or stakeholder, whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, when you have the MLS commissioner on the U.S. soccer board, as well as one of the, not the president, but the general manager of one of the largest clubs, Atlanta United, is also on the U.S. soccer board. It tells you a lot about that. Not to mention the CEO, Will Wilson, is a former SUM employee, which is ultimately the organization that ties MLS and U.S. soccer together.
With the SUM contract.
Right, with the SUM contract. So my thoughts, guys, about this is very similar to what a lot of you have said. It just feels like the same old, same old. One of the candidates, it wasn't Eric Winalda. It was the other guy who I really liked at the last voting. What was his name? He's a former international, used to work for NBC. I completely forgot his name. I'm pulling a Greg Berhalter right now.
Grant Wall? No, I'm just kidding.
Grant Wall. But he was saying in an interview later that they knew the results of the election 2 days before the actual voting happened because the Athletes Council had decided to vote as a group. And by the way, the Athletes Council includes guys who are currently in the media, like Stu Holden, who is responsible for telling us, a lot, giving his opinion about American soccer.
Is Stu still on? I saw the list. I saw Gucci Onye was on. I didn't see Stu's name.
I know Stu was last time. I know he was a part of the Athletes Council last time. I believe Carlos Bocanegra was as well. Gucci Onye. Mm-hmm. So a lot of what you guys are saying about how it's a boys club. Cronyism is kind of the word that comes to mind with U.S. soccer. While we're talking about Carlos Cordeiro being responsible for hiring Greg Berhalter, whether or not you think Berhalter was the best guy for the job, one thing that's fairly common knowledge is that there was no real coaching search, right? They interviewed him and I believe Oscar Pareja, and that was kind of it. And when several much more qualified candidates asked to be interviewed, they were told that they were too late in the process, So, the guy who won the Europa League with Sevilla and coached Real Madrid and coached the Spanish national team asked, to be considered and was, basically rebuffed. So the way that whole coaching search was conducted, for me, is, a huge part of Carlos Cordeiro's responsibility. And, whether or not you think Berhalter's the right guy for the job, that's not how you conduct a good coaching search, right? So the other thing that I think maybe influences this election is that for many years, U.S. soccer was basically run by Sunil Gulati as the president. He made almost all the decisions on his own, along with Dan Flynn, the former CEO. Now, however, there has been some restructuring at U.S. soccer to include general manager in Ernie Stewart, and then, men's and women's general team managers in Brian McBride and Kate Margaff. But I don't know if those are simply cosmetic sort of positions where it's like, okay, look, we've done this, we've set up a better structure now leave us alone and stop trying to hold us accountable, right? We don't really know how that actually works in the back room, but it's possible that because the presidential seat doesn't have a lot of power right now, is that something that could maybe discourage people from running, especially when you consider it's an unpaid position?
Unpaid?
Officially, yeah, it is an unpaid position. Whether or not there's other perks, we don't know. We can't really speak to that. But at least on the face of it, it is an unpaid position.
Well, who has a chance? No one does. Right now, Parlo Cone pretty much has this thing wrapped up. I'm surprised.
Are you sure, though? See, I don't know if Carlos Cordeiro would run if he didn't think he had a good chance of winning again.
Maybe he's got some insider buddies that we don't know about. But it would sure look bad if he was kicked out and he got put back in after what.
They're not worried about looking bad. They're not.
Yeah, I don't know that that's ever been a major concern of theirs. Well, my question is, would sponsors care?
That was the big question in the article.
Was because there was pressure from sponsors. Yeah. We don't want to be associated with this kind of rhetoric, understandably. So would sponsors now go, hey, what, we brought back the same guy? I don't know. It's, again, there's so many things it feels like we don't know just because so many things happen behind the scenes and because transparency is not something that USSF is known for.
Those sponsors aren't coming back. They will again make the same noise if he wins. So I don't know why they would risk it. I don't know why anybody who has a vote would risk that as well. And it would look really bad. And when I say that, it really would look bad. And they don't like looking bad like that in the media.
And you said earlier, regardless of who wins, it doesn't really change anything. Well, I don't think that's accurate. I think it changes a lot from the opposition perspective. Whenever I say opposition, I'm talking about the lawyer team from the U.S. women's national team, because if Cordeiro is brought back as the president, then they're able to fight this out in the press as they have been doing for the last 4 years, and they have a lot of ammunition in their gun. The big thing that Cindy Parlo Cone brought to the discussion is that they could no longer point to the man in charge of U.S. soccer and say that this is a mistake misogynistic organization because they had a woman in charge. If
But
they bring
Sam,
Cordeiro back, that changes that significantly.
But that being said, is that just optics? Because
Yeah,
even
but
under
but
Cindy
this has been
Pardo-Cone,
discussed in the court of public opinion. That's where it's all happening, and that's the most important thing for the women's national team perspective. The reality of the situation has not impacted the discussion nearly as much as it should. And I mean, the women's national team made a whole documentary expressing their side, which kind of played with the facts. He dodged them in their direction as much as they could. The court of public opinion is where they really want to fight the U.S. soccer organization, and that's where Carlos Cordeiro really hurts this entire ordeal.
Yeah, Sam's right about the optics.
Yeah, I don't know if just because Cindy Pardo-Cone is a woman, I don't know that she has necessarily actually been helpful to the women's cause, in terms of actually, being on their side. I just wonder if it's really more of an optics. Well, she's a woman, therefore we're more comfortable with it.
Well, I agree with that. It is coverage. That's all it is.
That's the whole thing.
It's optical coverage. That's all it is. So it just makes them even. If Carlos is there, it makes it worse. I mean, optically. But other than that,
look,
there's really no difference.
Just to give my final thoughts on this topic is just, it's just whatever.
It makes you want to gag.
It's just kind of like it's ridiculous that we have to even talk about this because of how U.S. soccer projects things. But my final thoughts on this are simply: Cordeiro should not be a candidate, right? Because of the way he left. That should be it. It shouldn't even be considered. I'm surprised people actually nominated this guy. But nothing will change in the U.S. soccer landscape, regardless of who is in charge. I understand what Sam is saying. It probably would affect their lawsuit or whatever it's going on in the media. But in terms of U.S. soccer, whoever it is of these two, and probably other candidates that they will put in the future, whoever's in charge, it won't change. It needs drastic changing. It needs an outsider to come in and shake things up, and maybe U.S. Soccer Federation will become a serious organization, because right now it's a circus. That's all it is. That's all U.S. soccer is right now. A bad circus, right? Not like Cirque du Soleil, which is a pretty fun circus to go to. Like a very bad circus, like the cheap ones, kind of like the
one that comes into town for 2 weeks and takes their money and then
the American Horror Story one, like that one.
Clown show with the 4-H.
A scary one.
All right, guys, I'm sure we can talk about this endlessly, but we do have to move on here. It'll be interesting to see what happens with the election. I believe it's in March or April.
March 5th.
March 5th. March 5th is the actual election. We'll see how it ends up going, but I think Filippo sort of summed it up pretty well with that soliloquy there. The next thing I wanted to discuss, guys, is some comments made by Greg Berhalter. We're in a unique situation right now where we have World Cup qualifying games in less than 2 weeks, right? And at the moment, all of the MLS teams are in the off season. So Camp Cupcake, which has traditionally been a way to bring MLS players in and get them familiar with the national team coach and the project and the product and whatever, are now being prepared for World Cup qualifying. Now, I think most people in the American soccer landscape understand by now that the vast majority of our quality players are playing in Europe, right? In one league or another. And Berhalter made some interesting comments comparing. It was a little bizarre because he compared two guys who don't even play in the same position, Brendan Aronson and Walker Zimmerman, who for my money should both be involved with the national team at this point. But I want to read the quotes to you and then get your guys' thoughts. This is the quote. The important thing here to understand is why we did the December camp and why we had these guys playing. Some of the European guys, Brendan Aronson, for example, hasn't played in a month. He was off December 12th. A guy like Walker Zimmerman, his last game was December 18th, and now he's back on January 7th. There wasn't that much time off for these guys. We're going to use the next 2 weeks to evaluate where these guys are. So if you guys don't mind, I want to start with my thoughts on these comments because I find them a little disingenuous, to say the least. First of all, you're talking about guys in two different positions, so I'm not sure why they're being compared. Second of all, what's been noticeably unsaid in these comments is that, Brendan Aronson has been training with Salzburg. They had a training camp that started the same time as the Camp Cupcake and will be playing 3 or 4 friendlies with Salzburg, before World Cup qualifying begins. What's more, the vast majority of the European players will be playing competitive games, over the course of January, which is significantly more of a, benefit to match sharpness and fitness than just training. On top of that, what he failed to mention is that most of the MLS guys in his camp haven't played a competitive game for 3 months once the actual World Cup qualifying roster, is released. Most of these guys was either at the end of October or the beginning of November that they played their last competitive game. And so I just find his comments to be a way of saying, essentially, I feel that these guys in camp are better prepared for World Cup qualification than the guys in Europe. But it's interesting that he chose the one league that won't be back in order to make his point. Like he could have used John Brooks, for example, who plays the same position as Walker Zimmerman, but he couldn't do that because John Brooks is playing competitive games throughout all of January, and that would kind of defeat what felt like his point. But those are my thoughts. What do you guys think? Should we start with Filippo?
Sure. The first thing that I find very funny is that he considers that Bosnia game a competitive match, right? That's the first thing. Just because you're playing in a stadium with fans, it doesn't mean it becomes automatically a competitive match, because how is that any different from RB Salzburg having a friendly with BSC Young Boys from PFOC? They're going to play each other this month. So There's no difference. It's a friendly with fans, without fans, nothing changed. Otherwise, all the Bundesliga games right now with no fans are all friendlies. There's no fans. So that's the first thing I want to say. The second one is he mentioned Walker being in camp with in December 18th. And again, not even arguing, Zimmerman should be in the roster regardless of But if that's the point, then I guess Paul Riola and Leggett shouldn't make the roster. They weren't there in December. They haven't played. They just got back. They're training right now. All these guys are playing. Conrad de la Fuente is playing this month, competitive games, actual competitive games. That means something. And many other players, John Brooks, as you mentioned, and many other players abroad. So the problem with Greg has always been with his press conferences, it's somewhat consistency with what he says, right? For some players, it's one standard. For other players, it's a different standard. And usually it goes about where they play, because he could have used Sebastian Leggett as an example of a player that hasn't played in a while. He was, I believe, in Hawaii during the December camp in his vacation, which is totally fine. I mean, the man does need vacation eventually. And he did have a busy 2021. But Leggett, for example, just came back. Paul Riola just came back. These guys Miles Robinson, just so it doesn't seem like I'm picking on Leggett or Riola, Miles Robinson just came back too. He was on vacation. These guys haven't played. When was the last time Miles Robinson played a game? November for Atlanta against New York when they lost? That was the last game he played. And he's not going to play any other game besides friendlies. So, I mean, I'm fine with Robinson even starting, but wouldn't it mean that Brooks should be there in that sense? He's playing. So, again, it just seems like Greg usually goes almost like a guilt that he has inside of him, that he goes out of his way to justify sometimes the MLS guys. Almost like he has that inside guilt that he'll go out of his way to explain it, even in very poorly, right? Like this reminds me of those comments about Conrad, of how he doesn't provide verticality and Areola does. It just never made sense. It was just to justify why he had Areola, and how he said that PFOC doesn't stretch the back line and Zardes does to justify Zardes, which honestly between Zardes and PFOC, I don't even know at this point. But it seems like it's one of those moments where Greg goes out of his way to justify some of the guys that are highly questionable to be in the roster.
Yeah, for me, it's just more of the same. It's an inauthentic answer to a not really very hard question, and that's pretty much par for the course for Berhalter. And as you say, sometimes he goes out of his way to justify certain things. I don't know what's in his subconscious, but I mean, we get back to an organization that before the news conference even starts, some guy has to bark and say, Greg Berhalter's played more than any 57, 8 or whatever more players this year than anybody else. And they were the youngest team in the left ever played for the, I mean, that's just jargon and it's BS. Nobody wants to hear that. And sometimes he just gives inauthentic answers. And that's certainly one of them, because this is a crazy thing to say. Aronson's going to be back. He's going to be playing friendlies here really soon if he hasn't already played one. I thought he had one scheduled for today or yesterday it was, but
yeah, there was already one the other day that he played in, I believe.
Well, he's
and
playing.
He will play more. Yeah, he is playing. And the other thing that we talk about quality of games, like, Filippo mentioned Bosnia. Just to clarify, the U.S., this current Camp Cupcake will play 3 friendlies before World Cup qualifying starts. One of them will be against a local college team, I believe. Another one will be against Phoenix Rising. So we're talking about a USL team also in preseason. And the other one will be against Sporting Kansas City, also in preseason. So just, to be fair, they are going to be playing friendlies as well. But that wasn't brought up. What was brought up is Walker doesn't have had much of a break. He is, however, training with us, unlike those European guys who are just like, it almost felt like he was like just saying all those European guys are all on break too,
Yeah.
They're all for your thoughts.
Yeah.
For me, this is mostly just coach speak, and I think we see Greg do this a lot. He tends to protect players and kind of not throw people under the bus. We all know the reality of the situation. Like the majority of these MLS guys haven't played a lot, and there's guys in this camp like probably Daquan Jones, probably Selena, probably Jordy Mihailovic, who are just here to be here for a few weeks. They're not going to take part in that camp, and what Greg probably, if he's being honest, he would probably say, a lot of these guys aren't going to participate. They're only here, like, if necessary. They don't have the fitness. But he's not going to come out and say that in front of this camp. I think that this is the answer that you would expect from a coach, and that's kind of what he gave. It kind of doesn't say a lot. It doesn't mean much, but Greg Berhalter has this gift of giving what seem like long and detailed answers to questions without saying anything at all. It's pretty spectacular. If you listen to his podcast with Bobby Warshaw, he can wax poetically for minutes at a time on an answer without really revealing much at all. It's a pretty impressive trait, but that's pretty much what I see here. It's just I don't see that he said anything at all, because we're focusing on the first part of what he said about comparing Walker Zimmerman to Brendan Aronson, but at the end he says we're going to use the next 2 weeks to evaluate these guys and see where they are, and then he goes on in the article to say we're going to see who's 90 minutes match fit at the end of this camp. So he says all that, and then at the end says, well, we still don't know if these guys are going to be 90 minutes match fit. So
here's my question. Why not then just say, look, we're evaluating these guys in camp to see where they are fitness-wise? Why preface that answer by comparing and essentially claiming that the guys you have in camp are more fit than a guy like Brendan Aronson? Why preface it with that if your intention is not to prepare the fan base for the reality that there might be quite a fair few of these guys in the World Cup qualifying roster? Because that's how it felt to me. And
I would say I didn't feel like he was saying that these guys are more fit than the guys in Europe. I didn't get that feeling from reading this quote. But the other thing is, you've got these 19 guys in camp, and I would imagine if you're the coach, you want all of them in this camp with the expectation that they could potentially be making the roster. So you want that carrot dangled in front of them at all times. I wouldn't in the opening press conference for the camp cut them off at the knees by saying they're probably not going to make it.
Cutting them off the knees by saying we're evaluating everyone to see where they're at. Because again, going out of your way to insinuate, look, these guys in Europe really not that fit, which is essentially what he did with Aronson. Let's be honest, right? Compared to Walker Zimmerman, who's just been in camp for 2 months straight. That's essentially what he said.
One question. Did in any moment the reporter mention Brendan or Walker, or was that something that came out of Greg?
I believe Greg just brought it up.
He just brought. That's the problem.
Yeah. He literally does say we're going to use these next 2 weeks to evaluate where these guys are. Like he said that.
This is what I got out of it, out of what he said. Once again, in a sneaky way, and partially agreeing with Sam, where Greg is very smart with his words. He didn't really give an answer while he downplayed the guy in Europe. He didn't give an answer. So he said, I am going to look into it. If nothing's decided, but he downplayed the guy in Europe before he did that. It's almost like very smart psychology from Greg, right? At this point, he kind of like, I didn't really say anything. It can be any of the players. I'm still open. I'm going to evaluate. But the guy in Europe is less fit, by the way. That's what he's trying to say.
Which is funny because the one guy that can run for days and days and days
Is Ariola.
Brendan Aronson. No, Brendan Aronson. So it's hilarious. You pick the one guy who, could probably play 3 games in a row, 90 minutes each, no problem, and motor through all of it without any issues, and use him as an example.
It's because he would take Paul Ariola's spot, and then Greg couldn't give him that nice warm hug.
Well, also, Brendan Aronson was one of the most productive players for the national team in World Cup qualifying, right? In terms of like goals and assists. But I think what this really is about is, and again, like I said earlier, the 2 guys that he brought up, Brendan Aronson and Walker Zimmerman, I fully expect both of them to be in the roster, and as they should be. I think they both have showed enough with their performances over World Cup qualifying to be included. I don't really think this is about fitness or not fit, because if you ask most of the fan base, Matt Turner, Miles Robinson, Walker Zimmerman, possibly Jordan Morris or Kellen Acosta, guys like that, we probably feel like, whether or not they are fully fit right now, they've demonstrated enough over the course of World Cup qualifying to be included. Now, whether you agree with all 5 of those guys is, maybe there's questions about 1 or 2. But I think what we're more worried about, as I understand it, is guys who have not performed for the national team continuing to get Berhalter's trust in 2022 simply because they were in these camps with him where they were, there to build familiarity. And, what we've seen in the past from Berhalter is if you're in Camp Cupcake, you almost always get preferable, roster selection spots just because of familiarity and not necessarily because of performance.
That's something Sam questioned Alexi actually once.
Yeah, it's something that's been frustrating me for a while, is the lack of opportunities for the B-level European-based players, whereas guys like DeJuan Jones, who otherwise would never get called into a U.S. men's national team camp, are able to get these opportunities just because of the league that they play in and their availability. Someone like Cameron Carter-Vickers, who is on the edge of the roster, or even a Luca De La Torre, Conrad De La Fuente. I mean, there's Julian Green. There's a lot of these guys that just haven't had opportunities because there's no situations where guys like this can get called in on a regular basis. It is a frustration for me. I do wonder if the opening round of the Nations League coming up in June is going to be an opportunity for some of those guys, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I guess we'll find out what happens come, when that World Cup qualifying roster is dropped. At the very least, I'm hoping for a very large roster.
Yeah,
because I just think with 3 games coming up and with, a lot of the guys in MLS not being fully fit, we are going to need backups, good quality substitutes, options. I'm hoping it's not like a 26-man roster like we've seen in the past. I'm hoping more for 28, 29. And I do hope that it's the vast majority of it, like 80, 90% is European based, partially because of performance and partially because of those guys are, for the most part, playing regular competitive minutes and have been for the last few months.
They're also in mid-season, Pete, which usually is your peak form.
Right.
You're not too tired, but you're already in rhythm with the season, usually, right, for the most case.
The big question mark is 2 of those guys are Tim Weah and Gio Reyna, who don't fit into that category because they have been out for an extended period of time, and we're waiting to see if they're going to be able to get back up to match shape. It sounds like Gio Reyna is going to be ready to go for Dortmund's next game. Whether or not this 2 weeks is enough run-up for him to get back in the 90-minute shape, or if he's going to be a sub, or whatever the case may be. But Weah seems to be a much bigger question mark and is growing concern day by day. And like Pete said, I mean, we're going to have bodies to cover these guys if the event comes where they can't go.
Yeah. I guess the real question is, where are those bodies going to come from? I would, a guy like Conrad De La Fuente, for me, could be an interesting backup to Weah and Gio. Maybe not, I wouldn't start him, but I'd have him off the bench. Whereas I think it's going to be more like Paul Ariola.
Jordan Morris is the big question mark.
Morris, man. I would actually, again, we haven't seen a ton of Jordan Morris, right? He just got back after a year. He started to show, he was playing 45 minutes with Seattle. Of the players that played against Bosnia, I thought he was one of the better performers.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, this whole January camp is the Jordan Morris camp. Can they get this kid back up to 90-minute shape? Because, Greg mentioned it in this article we're discussing where those 2 guys, Weah and Reyna, we don't know what we're going to get out of them. And having Morris in that squad would be absolutely massive. He's one of the few players that has a ton of camps, a ton of experience, has played in World Cup qualifiers, and has a ton of goals for the national team.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's move on, guys, to the next topic. John Anthony Brooks. Now, he is the subject of much debate within national team circles. Probably the most experienced player we've had. Him and DeAndre Yedlin, I think, are the only two in the current crop who have been to a World Cup.
I was going to say Tim Ream, but he wasn't.
He wasn't in the World Cup.
No, he wasn't in the. But experience-wise, pretty.
From experience, sure, yeah. There's some experience with Tim Ream there. Brooks's performances for Wolfsburg and for the national team recently have not been very good and led to his being dropped from the last roster. Now, Brooks is playing again in competitive games. He played last week. I believe it was against, was it Mainz?
Bochum,
VfL Bochum. That's right.
Lost.
The question I want to pose to you guys, Sam, why don't we start with you? Should John Anthony Brooks, in your opinion, be in this next roster?
My expectation is that he's going to be in this roster. He was dropped from the last roster. The word that we got was because it was about form, but everybody questioned that. And I think we were right to question that. And I think we were justified with, I believe it was Derek Ray came out with a report saying that it was actually an attitude issue, and John Brooks and Greg Berhalter had a discussion about it, and that checks out with what we know about John Brooks because he's had attitude issues in the past, both for the national team and with his club teams. And it seems like the way Greg Berhalter handles these things, like we saw with the Weston McKennie incidents in Nashville, is you'll have a meeting, he's going to issue out his discipline, but after that, he wants to give you a clean slate. At least that's what he talked about with Weston McKennie. So I'm expecting the same thing with John Brooks, and it's going to be up to John Brooks with how his attitude has changed going into this camp. But I think, coming into World Cup qualifiers, we thought John Brooks was going to be an absolute stalwart for the national team, but we've seen Miles step up. We've seen Richards really step up and play really well lately for Hoffenheim. And Walker Zimmerman has come in as a pretty good backup. We've seen how much faith Greg has in Aaron Long, and McKenzie over in Belgium is getting some minutes too. So that center back field is rounding out. So I think it is going to be entirely on John Brooks' attitude moving forward within the group, which is something that we're not really going to see. We have seen him be demonstrative on the field and argue with players and argue with Greg on the field. We'll see if that continues in this window or not. But I think that's the main thing. I think he's still the single best long passer in this entire pool. I think he still brings things to the field that nobody else can replicate from a center back position. He is a little slow, and he does get beat in transition, and that is something to worry about moving forward. But I still think that he has a big part of this national team moving forward if he can play ball.
So just to clarify something you said there, it wasn't Derek Ray who said he had an attitude problem. Derek Ray was actually quoting an article in Bild.
I said he reported it. Okay, so he reported the article.
He was reporting his article in Bild that largely was talking about his club form, right, and his situation with Wolfsburg, but also mentioned that he had attitude problems. I find it very unlikely that Greg Berhalter is the kind of coach who would be talking to a European tabloid about one of his players having attitude problems.
No, I think it was from John Brooks's camp that put that out there.
Why would John Brooks's camp tell Bild that he had attitude problems, though?
I don't know. Why would Luca Del Torre go on a podcast and talk about why his transition issues, It
wasn't John Brooks's camp.
It was Wolfsburg who put it out. Yeah. They're trying to basically lower his price artificially because they're going to have to either let him go or sell him here soon. So, they want to re-sign him. They don't want him to go. So they're, why would another team want to sell a guy with or buy a guy with an attitude problem?
So it wasn't Brooks's camp. I doubt it was Berhalter as well.
Literally 2 weeks ago, Lukaku came out and said he wanted to leave Chelsea and wasn't happy and issued all this dirty laundry out there on the field. I mean, we don't know these players.
But hang on, but Sam, Lukaku isn't saying I have an attitude problem. Lukaku's saying I've got an issue with the coach because of this, that, and the other. For a report to come out saying that a player was dropped because they have an attitude problem, I don't know a single player in the world that would tell a newspaper.
I don't think that's how that would work. I think that Brooks would go back to his club, would tell his entourage what was going on, what happened, and then a member of the entourage leaks that to the press. That's how that works.
So you have no evidence of that. You're just assuming that, right?
I'm assuming that's what would have happened.
I know people from Brooks's camp. It wasn't them that put that out. That caught them off guard. I'm telling you right now. That wasn't what happened.
And can we just
They can quote me on this. It wasn't Brooks's camp. Now I can't say it wasn't Greg, but I doubt it was Greg. He wouldn't really do it.
I doubt it would be Greg. He hasn't leaked things like that in the past. I mean, we still don't know what happened with the McKinney situation, so I'm assuming.
But those are two different things. McKinney, yes, he went out and partied, but that's not the same issue that Greg has with Brooks. That's a whole different issue. And yes, if you talk to Brian Schroeder or anybody behind the scenes who knows anything about John Brooks, this is a normal pattern for him. He has a problem sitting the bench, and when he sits the bench, he gets PO'd and he wants to play. And if he doesn't play, he's a bad attitude. And then he can be really, if he thinks he's sort of the supposed leader of the team, as he thinks he is with the U.S. because he's the vet, then he's really kind of nasty to everybody as well when they make errors or they don't do something he doesn't like. He has a bad attitude on I don't think he's going to be back, folks. I don't. From everything I've heard, something miraculous would have to happen for him to come back. First of all, you've got Zimmerman and Miles, who have kind of solidified, I think, the two starting spots. And I don't care how good Brooks is. I don't think that he's coming back, because then you look at the folks behind him that he's battling for. You know Richards is coming, and Long is a big favorite. So there's 4 already that he's not going to come in above. And I think we've seen the last of Brooks. I hate to say
Derek,
it,
you're saying he's not going to come back. Do you think he should come back?
Well, I'd bring him back if I thought he wouldn't be a problem or an issue or have an attitude issue. If I said, I'm sorry, I'm going to start Zimmerman and Richards today, you're going to be on the bench. And if he wouldn't be an attitude or have an attitude about that or bring the team down, then and be a team player, then I would bring him back. But that's not really the kind of guy that Brooks is. Brooks wants to play bad, and he'll have an attitude if he is not playing. And that's going back to the more recent qualifiers before his back spasms and not showing up or him not being called up the next time. The back spasms, by the way, were a complete baloney story. There were no back spasms. I can tell you from my sources, no such thing. And so, yeah, the problem is that if you bring Brooks in and you're not going to play him, he's not there to twiddle his thumbs. That's the problem. He's not there to be a team player. That's a Tim Ream kind of guy. Tim Ream will come in and sit the bench. He's fine with that, but not Brooks.
Or Mark McKenzie.
So just to answer, mine will be a quick answer. It's based on talent and skills. Yes, I would bring John Brooks. But if Greg Berhalter comes out and says, look, we're not there, he has brought problems to the group, then yeah, don't bring the guy. But I don't know. Greg, until Greg comes out and says, I know probably he'll never do it because he's not going to want to go out and say,
right,
John Brooks has an attitude. He's not going to want to say that.
No. Yeah.
But unless we know that's like, yes, he actually has an attitude problem with camp and Greg has had issues with him. If he does have issues, then don't bring him, because you want to have a group that's together and you don't have problems among each other. But if there is no issue in that, yes, I would bring John Brooks.
Sam, you even had Meg on your show, and she even hinted at an issue going back when you interviewed her, Meg Swanwick. She said,
yeah, that was way back in the second window.
Yeah, there's something going on there, she said. She didn't want to get into it. You could tell she didn't want to get real specific, but man, you couldn't have intimated that any harder than she did.
My thought as to why I think he's going to get a call up in this window is because of the letter that he put out right whenever he didn't get called up last time. That seems to me like something that was discussed between him and Greg. You know, you're not going to get called in. There's going to be a lot of controversy. You put out a letter, you know, whatever, and then we'll bring you back in next time. That reminds me of like whenever I would get in trouble in middle school and the teacher would make me like write a letter to the class apologizing for, you know, ruining the field trip or whatever.
Wait, did that ever happen to you?
I want to know more about Sam ruining field trips in school.
Wait, what field trip?
I probably made the field trip, honestly, but you know, the teacher didn't see it that way. But anyway, that's what it reminds me of in that situation. So that's why I think he's going to get another opportunity. Like Derek said, whether or not he seizes that opportunity and becomes a different guy or not, we'll see moving forward. I know that the World Cup is always a big carrot on a stick for any player, and I'm sure John wants to be a part of that next World Cup. So we'll see moving forward.
Yeah, but honestly, who are you going to take out to play Brooks at this point?
I think
no. I mean, Brooks wants to start. Who are you
Yeah,
going to not
I think
start?
he's a starter.
Okay,
I think
so
he's a
Derek,
starter
here's
next to
what I
Robinson.
think needs to happen. If you don't think Brooks should start, and you can certainly make a case for that, then before camp, Greg Berhalter needs to have a conversation with Brooks, right? And he's done this with McKenzie, because McKenzie said on an Orange Slices podcast that he heard he probably wasn't going to play so much in this camp, that he was more there for backup. So if you want Brooks back in camp, but you don't want to start him, then you need to have a conversation with him in advance and say, listen, John, I'm happy to have you back in camp. Right now, you don't start for me just because of form or whatever issues you have. If you're going to be willing to stay in camp, and look, we have 3 games, right? We are going to have to rotate to a degree. Maybe you'll get minutes, maybe you won't, but you're a veteran. You're somebody that can provide a lot of leadership in this group. Are you willing to do that? And if he is, great. And if he's not, then say, okay, well, then maybe we have to leave you off. I think that needs to be a conversation between Greg Berhalter and Brooks. Attitude problems aside, my issue with Brooks, and Sam sort of hinted at this, is defending on the turn. When the game is in front of him, Brooks is fine. He's good at reading the game. He's very good at distributing the ball. He times his tackles well, generally speaking. When the ball is played behind the back line, and when you're playing a high-pressing team, you play with a very high back line, his ability to turn and sprint back and sort of recover either looks like he doesn't really want to do it. He's often jogging when he's doing it, or doesn't look like he really knows what to do when the ball is played. And that's been a consistent weakness of Brooks, which I think is what hampers him the most. Now, that being said, all of our center backs have weaknesses. I think Richards could be better in the air, for example. I think both Walker and Miles need to be better with their distribution and to a degree with their reading of the game. But I think the deciding factor, it seems from this panel, is that his attitude might or might not be the issue. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in January. I think he should be back, especially because both Miles and Walker are not fully fit. And I'm just not sure that they're ready to play 3 90-minute games, in the space of a week. So I would have Brooks back, but maybe if you don't want to start him in every game, he has to understand his role, Yep.
And he's got to embrace that.
Yeah. And then maybe through performance on the pitch, try to earn a starting spot back. I mean, we want merit-based inclusion, right? We want players to earn their spot back on the field. Maybe it's a challenge. Hey, John, we got a World Cup in Qatar. Show me, you should start again. Like, convince me in training, convince me with your performances for your club. And then when you step on the field for the national team, convince me again. Guys, we got to move on, though. We have 2 more things I'd like to discuss here. One of them, and this is maybe something that we can start with Derek on.
Come back,
What
Derek.
do you think is the minimum acceptable amount of points in the upcoming World Cup qualifying window?
Yeah, I mean, we had this discussion with Jimmy Conrad, and I think we all decided 6 would be okay, minimally acceptable, and that's winning the 2 obvious games.
So wait, do you think losing to Canada is acceptable?
I don't think it's acceptable. I don't like it. I don't like saying that, but I think 6 points is where it's the minimal. So if we end up tying or losing to Canada, I guess we can live with it as long as we get the 6 points, because that puts us well on our way to qualifying for the World Cup. I prefer it be 7 points, or in a perfect world, 9. But, we always seem to come out with that a minimal amount of points. So I'm going to stick with my guns here and say 6.
Okay. Sam?
Yeah, I'm at 6 as well. I've been saying for a while that the least important game in this next window is this Canada game. If we win the 2 games at home against El Salvador and Honduras, we're pretty much qualified. We're not mathematically qualified, but we're pretty much qualified, and that is the mission. Now, I understand that everybody wants to beat Canada, myself included. Everybody wants to give Canada our best shot, but in doing so, if we were to not get 3 points from any of the other games, it would be a catastrophe. So I think 6 points is the minimum. And I wonder if that's the same thing that Canada is thinking going into their window, because they're in largely the same position as us, except they haven't made a World Cup in a long time. So I'm wondering if because they're playing the same teams as us, I wonder if they're looking at the away games against El Salvador and Honduras as must-wins in order to secure that qualification, and looking at our game as one where they might rotate. It's going to be interesting to see how both coaches approach it. because I know it's going to be a grudge match, but that's where I'm at. 6 points.
Okay, Filippo.
I want to correct Sam in one thing. The Canadian game is probably the only one that matters to me. My Twitter account is done. They're gonna come back to that tweet that I put Jonathan David's flag. I'm done. We gotta beat Canada. It's a pretty big game for me. We can even lose all the other two. I gotta beat Canada. I don't care if we make it to the World Cup.
Oh my God, Filippo.
So you're going for
Fighting
three
words from Filippo here. Fighting
points.
words.
I'm joking. We have to win all this. In terms of that, and also adding to what Sam said, the last time Canada made the World Cup, I think only Derek was born at that time.
That's correct. I was 11, I believe.
What an unnecessary shot.
Me and Derek can do that. He'll take a shot soon. Don't worry. He'll take.
He already said on an earlier. I don't know if you texted me this, but you look a lot older than your photo on the show.
I commented.
I
commented.
It's because that was photos 10 years old, man.
I also do know that Derek is missing his partner here, Brett. We're missing Brett here. They're like Batman and Robin, but we'll have them soon. But going back to what you said, I think 6 is acceptable depending on the circumstances, right? Here's the thing. In soccer, when you have a balanced game, we all know it can go either way depending on many different factors. And I think Canada away is a game that can go either way. We can come out the win, we can come for the draw, we can come for the loss, and we can even play well and still lose to Canada away. That can happen. That can totally happen. With that said, El Salvador and Honduras at home, there is no excuses. Those are not balanced matches. We are a much better team. We're playing at home. There's no excuses for like, oh, that one ball in the match just didn't go in. No, beat them 2-3-0. Control the game. Don't give them opportunities. There's no excuse. So those are 6 points. Canada is that type of game that anything can happen. We can win, we can lose, we can draw. So acceptable is 6. Acceptable. But we need to play well against Canada, with that said. We can't go there and get trashed by Canada. We have to play well. If we play well and we lose, so be it. Learn from it. See what went wrong. 6 points is the bare minimum. And with 6 points, I think Derek and Sam already said, and maybe even Pete as well, we reached 21 points, which, yes, mathematically we won't be confirmed to be in Qatar because there's still 3 games left after that. But 21 points technically locks us in the top 4. We're locked in the top 4 if we get 21 points.
Yeah.
So I think your expectations for a roster like this depends very much on what your expectations for the national team are in general. Should we be a team that just qualifies for the World Cup regularly and hopes to try to make it out of our group? Maybe once, we get there, then yeah, 6 points is probably acceptable. For me, though, the fact that we have far and away the best player pool in CONCACAF, and what we have been told many times is win your home games, get your draws away, which even I don't necessarily fully agree with. I think we should expect better in many cases. I think the minimum acceptable amount is 7 points. I don't think we're already 3 points behind Canada. And if we lose to them, we're now 4 points behind Canada. I don't think, even if you qualify for a World Cup, there is a world in which is it acceptable to finish below Canada in the Ocho, which essentially is probably what would happen if we lose to Canada. So I'm going to say 7. And
I have a question after you finish.
Well, so do I.
To Filippo's point, playing well is great, but this is also a results-based business. In World Cup qualifying, getting results is ultimately the really important thing. And I think 7 points should be the minimum acceptable. On top of that, remember, the majority of Canada's roster is MLS-based. And unlike us, they aren't having a training camp because COVID shut their training camp down. So the majority of Canada's roster is going to come here with not only no games under their belt, but without even a training camp. I don't think they're even going to be fully fit, which makes the case to at least get a draw in Canada even more compelling.
2 questions, actually, that I have. One is, that's your acceptable or demand? Because I demand 7.
That is what I consider acceptable.
Yeah,
I'm demanding a minimum of 7 points,
now
ideally 9.
But what trends do you see to make that even realistic? I haven't seen anything yet that would
I think the big thing, the big thing to what Pete said
is, go ahead, Sam.
The big thing to what Pete said is, how does Canada view this window? Do they want to put their big horses on the line against us, or do they want to use them away in El Salvador and Honduras? Because if they use them away in those, games against El Salvador and Honduras, two of the weaker teams in the region, they can pretty much qualify and wrap it up in this window. If they choose to come out against us, then they'll be putting those MLS players that you mentioned on the line away in CONCACAF. So it really depends on which Canada do we get.
See, from what I think is, even if they put their big guns on the line, we should still at least get a draw.
And we did in the Gold Cup, right?
Well, I mean, that was at home. This is away.
True,
right?
true.
So slightly different circumstances. But
Davies didn't play too in the Gold Cup.
Yeah. Derek, you were saying something before. Could you continue? Sorry to cut you off.
I mean, we all want to get 9 points, right? But I just think I haven't seen anything from this team that makes me think that they're going to come out of this with more than 6 or 7 at best. So I don't know.
So Derek, I mean, I want 9. I'm not demanding 9. I understand that that's probably unlikely. But I think what you're doing is you're basing your expectations on what this team should do based on recent results, right? And that's fine. I'm basing my expectations on what the player pool looks like and saying, because of this player pool, this is what we should expect.
I agree with you on that. Absolutely
Right.
agree with.
So just to add to that, the way I see this is, I think what we're having here is a problem of how each one defines acceptable, right? Because if we finish with 6, I'm definitely not going to be happy. Is acceptable something that I would be satisfied with? Is that because if it's satisfied, to me it's the 7 to 9 range. I'm not going to be finished with 6 points and just be completely honestly happy about it. What I would like to see is the 2 wins at home to be very convincing. No struggle. We shouldn't struggle. It should be 2-3-0 win, kind of like how we did with Jamaica. And Costa Rica, we kind of struggled because we allowed an early goal, but besides that, we controlled most of the match. I want to see us play against Canada to win. We need to play to win. How is it going to go? I don't know. Allow an early goal, a red card, things can happen. Things happen in soccer, especially in balanced matches. But I don't want to see Greg go into that game trying to play very defensive and trying to hold the draw against Canada and then finish the camp with 7 points, just bunkering and holding Canada. I want to see us go to Canada and it's like, let's try to win this. If it doesn't happen for whatever reason, it happens. But we need to go to Canada and try to win the game, regardless of what Canadian team they bring to us. Regardless, that's what I want to see. And hopefully 9 points out of it. But
so Derek,
we don't know.
Derek, sorry to cut you off, Felipe. You got cut off. I think you froze there.
I did.
You were responding to something I said about expectations. Go ahead and continue.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think 7, 8, 9. I mean, not 8 would be great. I think the issue is I haven't seen from Greg the ability to use this roster in an effective way and rotate that roster in an effective way to get the most out of a window yet. So I've seen us kind of just get by, just kind of. And so, I mean, am I supposed to expect that's suddenly going to change? And I think that's where I'm coming from. No, I don't. I think that's going to be how it goes.
So essentially you're saying Greg's recent performances are what set the bar for you and say, well, this is what we can expect.
Well, it doesn't set the bar for me internally. What it does is give me a trend of what's going on, what's happening. And I have to follow the logic. I can't just go with my heart.
I guess the word expectation, we're looking at it differently. I'm setting expectations like this is what I expect from this team, but deep down I know what we're probably going to get based on recent performances. And that's where I agree with you. But I still set my bar based on the player pool and say, this is what this team could be and should be. However, recent performances indicate it's probably going to be about here.
Right. And I'll still be throwing things at the TV because it will be frustrating. And that's how it's been so far.
For sure. Can you imagine how insufferable those Canadian fans are going to be if they win?
You guys are safe. They're all going to come after me. I'm the one that's going to be the
dude, they're going to come after everybody. Like, that's the nature of Canadian fandom these days. It's like new money, right?
Dude, even
got rich, soccer, and now they're like...
Even One Soccer, the media company, came to make fun of me because of my name and our coach. They literally quote tweeted my tweet saying, hey, tactical manager, that name definitely didn't come out of Greg Berhalter. I was like, how do I respond?
I mean, are they wrong?
They're right, but I just they literally trolled me and there's nothing I can respond.
I just can't handle another rant from Sid. If I have to listen to another Sid rant, I'm gonna join Derek in throwing stuff into TV. Oh God. Well, guys, this was super fun. Thank you for coming out to do this. I'd love to do, this at least once a month. What I really appreciate about this is the difference in opinions and the variance in ideas and approaches. And I think discussion is always good, and we need more of it. I think what we tend to get from mainstream media is one way of thinking. And I think in a forum like this, we can disagree and all defend why we, think what we think. And that's fantastic. And I think there needs to be more of this kind of discussion in the American soccer landscape. So I really appreciate you guys coming on. I'm going to put the links to all of their YouTube and Twitter accounts in the description below, guys. So if you are not already following one of these three fine gentlemen, and Derek, you work with Brett, I know you guys work together on the Straight Red Card, do give them a follow. Any last thoughts before we call it a day?
Yeah, not called this round of Camp Cupcake. Has actually been renamed as Camp Cookie because it's a little bit less important and smaller than Camp Cupcake.
I like cookies better than
Are you suggesting that cupcakes are more important than cookies?
I'm just saying
cookies are far superior to cupcakes.
What are we talking about?
Cookies
Unless
are
it's a
smaller.
banana nut cupcake, in which case I think that trumps a lot of cookies.
Well, I try.
All right, guys. Anything else, Sam or Filippo?
I think we're good.
Awesome. You guys have a
Filippo,
great one,
congratulations on signing with Toronto. I know you're a very wealthy man now.
Yeah. I want to make this clear once again. I'm not Insigne or however way you say his name. I am not.
Look at him with the black jacket on now. He just needs the turtleneck and the gold. That's all that's missing.
I had people also ask for my tax returns to prove that I'm not him. But I'm telling you guys, I'm not him.
Fair enough. All right, guys, let's call it a day. Have a great one, and hopefully we'll talk to you all soon.